Somewhere in the lightless depths of the Pacific Ocean, where sunlight dies long before it can touch the seafloor, a creature drifts silently, its body fragile, its movements ghost-like, and its head completely transparent. At first glance, it looks like a mistake of evolution, as if nature forgot to finish building it. But the Barreleye fish is not unfinished. It is something far more unsettling, perfectly adapted to a world we barely understand. Imagine staring into a living creature and seeing straight through its skull, watching its eyes glow and rotate inside a fluid-filled dome, tracking prey in total darkness. It feels unnatural, almost alien, yet this fish is very real, quietly surviving in one of the most extreme environments on Earth. For decades, it remained a mystery, rarely seen and poorly understood, its strange anatomy puzzling scientists who could only study damaged specimens hauled up from crushing depths. Those early encounters painted an incomplete and misleading picture, showing lifeless, collapsed remains where the fish's defining feature, its transparent head, had been destroyed by pressure changes. It wasn't until deep-sea exploration technology advanced that humanity finally glimpsed the Barreleye alive, drifting in its natural habitat like a biological paradox. And what scientists discovered was even stranger than anyone had imagined. Because this fish doesn't just look unusual, it sees the world in a way almost no other vertebrate can. In the deep ocean, vision is everything, but light is scarce, fragmented, and deceptive. Tiny flickers of bioluminescence replace the sun, glowing signals from prey, predators, and unknown organisms that communicate in flashes of blue and green. In this darkness, survival depends on detecting even the faintest hint of movement above. Most deep-sea fish solve this by evolving upward-facing eyes, locked in a permanent gaze toward the dim surface. But the Barreleye took a different path, one that feels almost like science fiction. Inside its transparent head, two tubular eyes sit like green cylinders, initially appearing fixed in place, pointing straight upward. For years, scientists believed that was all they could do. But that assumption was wrong. When observed alive, these eyes slowly rotate, pivoting forward to focus on prey directly in front of the fish. It's a level of visual flexibility that challenges our understanding of how vertebrate eyes are supposed to work. And this is where the unease begins to deepen. Because those glowing green structures you see aren't just eyes, they are part of a highly specialized optical system designed to capture and amplify the faintest traces of light. The green pigment acts as a filter, helping the fish distinguish between bioluminescent signals and the residual sunlight filtering down from above. It's not just seeing, it's interpreting a language of light in a world where deception is everywhere. And then there's the head itself. That transparent dome isn't a gimmick, it's a solution. A protective, fluid-filled shield that allows the eyes to move freely without obstruction, while also safeguarding them from the stinging tentacles of siphonophores and jellyfish, which the Barreleye is known to steal food from. Think about that for a moment. A fish that hovers motionless beneath drifting, venomous organisms, carefully plucking trapped prey from their grasp, all while avoiding becoming prey itself. It's a delicate balance of precision, patience, and biological engineering that borders on the surreal. But to truly understand why the Barreleye fish is so strange, you have to understand the world it inhabits, a realm known as the mesopelagic zone, often called the twilight zone of the ocean. Here, between roughly 200 and 1,000 meters below the surface, sunlight fades into darkness, pressure increases dramatically, and life becomes sparse yet bizarrely specialized. It's a place where evolution doesn't follow familiar rules, where creatures evolve transparency, bioluminescence, and otherworldly forms just to survive. In this environment, being visible can mean death. Many organisms become nearly invisible, their bodies gelatinous and fragile, blending into the darkness. But the Barreleye goes one step further, not just becoming invisible to others, but making parts of itself invisible even to us. Its transparent head is not just camouflage, it's a window into a biological system that challenges how we define anatomy itself. And yet, despite all this strangeness, the Barreleye fish remained hidden from human understanding for most of history. It lived its entire existence in silence, far beyond the reach of sunlight and human curiosity, until technology finally allowed us to descend into its world. Remotely operated vehicles, equipped with high-definition cameras, revealed a creature that moved with eerie calmness, its body barely twitching as it floated in the dark, its eyes scanning above and ahead like a surveillance system designed by evolution itself. There's something deeply unsettling about watching it, something that triggers the same instinctive discomfort we feel when confronted with things that don't behave the way we expect life to behave. Because the Barreleye fish doesn't just look different, it forces us to confront how little we truly know about life on our own planet. It exists in a place where the rules are rewritten, where vision becomes a weapon, and where transparency is not vulnerability, but strength. And as we begin to peel back the layers of this creature's biology, a question starts to form, one that will guide everything that follows. Is the Barreleye fish simply an oddity of evolution, or is it a glimpse into a deeper, more unsettling truth about how life adapts when pushed to the absolute limits of survival? As we descend deeper into the biology of the Barreleye fish, the initial shock of its appearance begins to give way to something far more intricate, a system of survival so finely tuned that every strange feature reveals a precise evolutionary purpose, and nowhere is this more evident than in the mechanics of its vision, because in the mesopelagic twilight, seeing is not simply about perception. It is about decoding a battlefield of light where every flicker can mean food, danger, or deception. And the Barreleye's tubular eyes are among the most specialized optical instruments found in any vertebrate, elongated like telescopes, packed with a high density of rod cells that allow it to detect incredibly faint light signals, far beyond what human eyes could ever perceive, and unlike typical fish whose eyes are fixed in sockets, these eyes are mounted on a flexible structure that allows them to rotate within the transparent dome, shifting from an upward gaze, scanning for silhouettes and bioluminescent trails above, to a forward-facing orientation when the fish prepares to feed, and this dual-mode vision is critical. Because prey in the deep sea doesn't behave predictably, drifting organisms like siphonophores and jellyfish capture smaller animals in their tentacles, turning themselves into floating traps, and the Barreleye has evolved to exploit this by hovering beneath them, carefully observing the captured prey before making a precise, calculated movement to snatch it without triggering the host's defenses. And this is where the transparency of its head becomes more than just a curiosity, because inside that dome, the eyes can rotate freely without obstruction, tracking targets with a smoothness that would be impossible if bone or opaque tissue blocked their movement, and the dome itself is filled with a clear fluid that maintains pressure and structural integrity, essentially acting as a biological helmet that protects the eyes while preserving optical clarity, and this raises an almost unsettling idea, that the fish is not just seeing through its eyes, but through its entire head, as if its skull has been replaced by a living window, and yet, this system comes with challenges, because transparency in biology is rare and difficult to maintain, requiring tissues that minimize light scattering and pigmentation, which means the fish must carefully balance visibility with vulnerability, and scientists believe that the dome also serves as a protective barrier against the stinging cells of jellyfish, allowing the Barreleye to approach dangerous prey sources that other fish would avoid, giving it access to a relatively untapped food supply in an environment where energy is scarce and competition is intense, and this feeding strategy is supported by its small, delicate mouth, which might seem underwhelming at first glance, but is perfectly suited for picking off individual prey items rather than chasing or tearing larger organisms, reinforcing the idea that this fish is not a hunter in the traditional sense, but a patient opportunist, relying on precision and stealth rather than speed and if we zoom out from the head and examine the rest of its body, the pattern continues, because the Barreleye is built for stillness, its fins positioned to allow subtle adjustments in buoyancy and orientation rather than rapid bursts of motion, its body soft and streamlined, minimizing energy expenditure in a world where calories are incredibly limited. And even its internal systems reflect this economy, with a metabolism adapted to survive long periods between meals, which may be unpredictable in the deep sea, and this brings us to another critical aspect of its biology, its relationship with light itself, because in the absence of sunlight, many deep-sea organisms produce their own light through bioluminescence, a chemical reaction that generates a cold glow, often used for communication, camouflage, or predation, and the Barreleye's eyes are specifically tuned to detect these signals, with the green pigment acting as a filter that enhances contrast, allowing it to distinguish between different wavelengths and intensities of light, effectively giving it the ability to read the environment in a way that goes beyond simple vision, and this is crucial because many organisms use counterillumination, producing light on their undersides to match the faint glow from above, making them nearly invisible to predators looking up. But the Barreleye's upward-facing vision and filtering system help it detect even these subtle disguises, breaking through one of the most effective camouflage strategies in the deep ocean, and yet, despite all the specialization, the Barreleye is not an apex predator, nor is it particularly aggressive, instead occupying a narrow ecological niche where its unique adaptations give it just enough of an advantage to survive, and this is perhaps what makes it so fascinating, because it represents a form of evolution that is not about dominance, but about precision, about finding a very specific way to exist in a very specific environment, and perfecting it over millions of years, And when scientists first observed its eye rotation in live footage captured by remotely operated vehicles, it forced a re-evaluation of earlier assumptions, revealing that much of what we thought we understood about deep-sea fish was incomplete, if not entirely wrong, and this is a recurring theme in deep-sea biology, where limited access and fragile specimens often lead to misconceptions, only corrected decades later when technology allows us to observe life in its natural state, and the Barreleye is a perfect example of this, because for years, its defining feature, its transparent head, was either missing or misinterpreted in collected specimens, leading to theories that failed to capture the true complexity of its design, and even now, there are still unanswered questions about how its neural system processes visual information, how quickly its eyes can adjust between orientations, and how it navigates a three-dimensional environment with such minimal movement, and these mysteries hint at a deeper level of sophistication that we have yet to fully uncover, suggesting that the Barreleye is not just a biological curiosity, but a window into the broader principles of life in extreme environments, where evolution pushes the boundaries of what is physically and functionally possible, and as we continue to study it, one thing becomes increasingly clear: the strangeness of the Barreleye fish is not random, not accidental, but the result of a long, deliberate process shaped by the unforgiving conditions of the deep ocean, a process that has produced a creature so specialized, so finely tuned to its environment, that it almost feels like it belongs to another world entirely, and yet it doesn't. It belongs to ours, hidden just beneath the surface, waiting in the darkness, perfectly adapted to a reality we are only beginning to understand. And yet, for all its precision, all its quiet perfection, the story of the Barreleye fish does not end with mastery of its environment. It drifts into something more uncertain, more fragile, because in the deep ocean, survival is never permanent, only prolonged, and even the most specialized adaptations can become limitations when the world begins to change. And although the Barreleye has existed for millions of years in the stability of the mesopelagic twilight, that stability is no longer guaranteed, as human influence slowly reaches even these remote depths through climate change, shifting ocean temperatures, acidification, and the growing presence of deep-sea fishing and exploration, all of which subtly alter the delicate balance of life far below the surface. And unlike creatures in more dynamic environments, the Barreleye cannot easily adapt to rapid change, because its entire existence is built around a very narrow set of conditions, specific levels, prey behaviors, and ecological interactions that have remained relatively constant for vast stretches of time. And when those conditions shift, even slightly, the consequences can ripple through the system in ways we barely understand, and this is where the true unease begins to take shape, because the Barreleye is not just strange, it is vulnerable in ways that are almost invisible to us, its fragility hidden behind its alien appearance, and there is something deeply ironic about that, because a creature that evolved such an extraordinary solution to the challenges of darkness may ultimately be threatened not by the environment it mastered, but by changes originating far above it, in a world it will never see. And this raises a broader question about the nature of evolution itself, because we often think of evolution as a process that leads to stronger, better, more advanced organisms, but the Barreleye tells a different story, one where success is not about becoming dominant, but about becoming perfectly suited to a specific moment in time, and that perfection can become a trap, locking a species into a narrow path that leaves little room for flexibility when conditions change. And in this sense, the Barreleye is not just a marvel of biology, but a reminder of evolution's limits, a reminder that adaptation is always a trade-off, always a compromise between competing demands, and nowhere is that more evident than in its transparent head, which gives it unparalleled vision but also represents a structural vulnerability, a reliance on a delicate balance of pressure and composition that could be disrupted by environmental shifts. And yet, despite all these risks, the Barreleye continues to exist, drifting silently through the darkness, its eyes scanning, its body conserving energy, its life unfolding in a rhythm that has remained largely unchanged for eons. And there is something almost meditative about that image, something that forces us to slow down and reconsider our perspective. Because in a world obsessed with speed, growth, and constant change, the Barreleye represents the opposite, a form of life that thrives on stillness, patience, and precision, and perhaps that is why it feels so alien to us, not just because of how it looks, but because of how it exists, operating on timescales and priorities that are completely disconnected from our own. And as we study it, as we send cameras and instruments down into its world, we are not just observing a strange fish. We are confronting a version of life that challenges our assumptions about what it means to survive, to perceive, to adapt, and even to evolve. Because the Barreleye does not fit neatly into our categories, it blurs the line between transparency and structure, between fragility and resilience, between simplicity and complexity, and in doing so, It forces us to acknowledge how limited our understanding still is, how much of our planet remains unexplored, and how many forms of life exist beyond the boundaries of our imagination. And perhaps the most unsettling realization is that the Barreleye is not unique in its strangeness. It is simply one example among countless others hidden in the depths, each with its own story, its own set of adaptations, its own way of navigating a world without light. And this suggests that what we consider normal life is only a small fraction of what is actually possible, a narrow slice of a much broader spectrum shaped by environments we rarely encounter. And as we continue to explore the deep ocean, we are likely to find more creatures that challenge our expectations, more systems that seem almost impossible until we understand the logic behind them. And in that sense, the Barreleye is not the end of a mystery, but the beginning of one, a doorway into a deeper understanding of life's potential. And yet, there is a quiet tension underlying all of this, because the more we discover, the more we realize how vulnerable these systems are, how easily they could be disrupted before we even have a chance to fully understand them. And this creates a kind of urgency, not just to explore, but to protect, to recognize that these distant, hidden ecosystems are not isolated from us, but connected in ways that are complex and often invisible. And so the story of the Barreleye fish becomes something larger than itself, something that extends beyond biology into philosophy, into our relationship with the natural world, because it asks us to consider what responsibility we have toward forms of life that we may never see, that we may never directly interact with, but that are nonetheless part of the same system that sustains us. And as the Barreleye drifts through the darkness, its transparent head catching the faintest traces of light, it becomes a symbol of that hidden world, a reminder that there are realities unfolding all around us that we barely perceive, and that our understanding of life is still incomplete, still evolving. And perhaps that is the most important lesson it offers. Not just that life can be strange, but that strangeness itself is a reflection of possibility, of the countless ways evolution can solve the problem of survival. And as we look into the clear dome of the Barreleye's head, watching its eyes move within, we are not just seeing a fish, we are seeing a glimpse of a deeper truth, one that is both humbling and profound. That life, in all its forms, is far more inventive, far more adaptable, and far more mysterious than we have ever imagined, and that the darkness we fear may, in fact, be filled with wonders we are only just beginning to understand.